what evidence is there that Obama caused a significant divergence in what the intelligence community assessment already was on all these things?
First off, the ICA disclosures that we see, particularly from Tulsi with the Durham Annex and everything, could be totally irrelevant to this debate as to whether or not the question that the Obama team used lawfare against Trump. They clearly did. I could concede the entirety of Tulsi Gabbard's claims being untrue, and it wouldn't change that fact. But to speak on the ICA reports, if you want right now, the problem isn't that the majority of it wasn't found to be accurate. The problem was the specific claim that the ICA found that Russia was interfering to help Trump.
In this video, Destiny exposes this MAGA debate coach's insane delusions with truth bombs. So Destiny kicks things off like usual by asking for solid evidence that Obama altered intel reports. But Rob, the MAGA debate coach, just instantly goes off the rails. He name drops Tulsi Gabbard and the Durham Annex, then literally admits that those claims might be irrelevant. Like he's already unraveling. From there, Destiny just patiently drags him back to reality, just exposing how flimsy his entire narrative really is throughout this debate. So make sure to watch till the end to see how Destiny exposes this MAGA debate coach's insane delusions with truth bombs.
Now, that claim is going to be important because that was necessary to get the public on board and to give the FBI and later the Mueller team the excuse for why they had to investigate Trump despite the very flimsy evidence for the opening of the investigation and the continuing of the tools they used, which we would later see would be corrupt, as in to corrupt Carter Page FISA warrants. They needed that claim that Russia didn't just interfere to mess with our system like they always do, but they actually interfered to help Donald Trump. Those are the claims that the Tulsi Gabbard files from the Durham Annex are releasing, and we can see that there was incredible discrepancies from how this ICA was put together compared to how normally the best standards and practices of the FBI are, up to including at least 2 of the 5 people working under Brennan, who was instrumental in putting together this ICA and this specific claim, saying that they disagreed with a lot of the additions that were made in there, particularly the things that were directly referencing the evidence that Russia interfered to help Trump. But since you read it and you're going to accuse me of not reading it, can you tell me the 4 pieces of evidence that were used that the Durham Annex showed that the ICA used to say that Russia interfered to help Trump?
I don't believe that those pieces of evidence were declassified.
No, it's not true. We now see through the Durham Annex that they were.
What is your impression of what those 4 things were?
So there were only 4 pieces of evidence that the Durham Annex says that were actually used to claim that Russia interfered to help Trump. And let me be clear so that we're not 2 ships crossing. You're absolutely right that the rest of the ICA report, pretty much everyone agrees, is pretty legit. Russia did interfere. They want to meddle in our systems, etc. It was that key claim that is the keystone to going after Trump with these investigations, that they interfered to help Trump.
Okay, well, before we go into this, do you agree that Russia intervened aggressively, far more against Hillary Clinton than against Donald Trump?
Yes.
So you agree that they did more to help. You agree that they did more to help Trump win than Hillary Clinton, correct?
Well, it's not that. That wasn't the intent. What happened was that there was just more information out there because of the carelessness of Hillary Clinton and the fact that she's been in office so long. And they just assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win, just like James Comey, just like everyone else, the New York Times, almost everyone in this country and around the world assumed because of the great institutional advantages that Hillary's going to win. So they thought it was insurmountable, basically, and that Hillary is going to win. So the entire intent was to cause distrust with the way that our elections are proffered. So it was never about picking or choosing. The evidence is overwhelming that they didn't like Trump either. They thought there would be a horse apiece, that both the presidents would be bad for Russia and wouldn't help relations. There was some evidence that suggested that actually they preferred Hillary Clinton because they found her to be predictable and would carry on the legacy of Barack Obama, whereas Trump was seen as sort of a wild card.
Wasn't the legacy of Barack Obama the murdering of Gaddafi in Libya, the Syrian refugee crisis that threw Russia into disarray, the intrusions against Russia's plans in the Middle East, as opposed to Bush, who was more cooperative in the war on terror?
So Destiny presses Rob on the core claim here. What specific proof exists that the intelligence committee twisted their assessment to help smear Trump? And Rob's response is kind of wild. He just doubles down on this idea that the ICA's statement, Russia interfered to help Trump, was basically a political weapon. But then he just admits that the rest of the report is legit. Like Rob literally says everything else was accurate except the one claim that makes his side look bad. That's not a critique, that's selective paranoia. And then it gets even messier. Rob just says that there were only 4 pieces of evidence backing the help Trump conclusion, but can't actually name them. He just waves at the Durham Annex like it's some holy text no one else has read. And Destiny calls it out right away. If those points were really so solid, why weren't they just properly declassified? Instead of proving anything, Rob just backpedals and starts blaming Hillary's carelessness and saying Russia maybe preferred her because she was predictable. Like, bro, that's not a defense. It's just fanfic with a MAGA twist.
How could you possibly say that they would prefer the Obama, the red line
No, the
statements?
legacy.
Yeah.
Right, the red line that he gave up on, right? You're right. And the fact
Wait,
that they
do you
were
think that
able to
Obama's
invade-
foreign policy was seen as nice by Putin? Do you
it
think
was
that he?
seen it was seen as predictable, right? They knew exactly how far they could push the line. And that's why they were able to invade Ukraine and Crimea in 2014 under Obama. That's why they didn't do it in 4 years under Trump. That's why they were able to call the bluff on Obama's Syria red line statement.
Wait, call the bluff. There's no evidence that they've continued to strike into Ukraine under Trump. They've escalated attacks under Trump. There's zero evidence to imply that they wouldn't have invaded under Trump. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't have done that. They continued to escalate attacks when Trump was president.
They didn't escalate under Trump's first term.
Sure, they did. They were still funding the civil war in the southeast. It continued to rage on. For the first time, Russian troops were present in Ukraine and confirmed, I think, under Trump's first term. So there's no evidence whatsoever. There's no reason to believe why they wouldn't have invaded under Trump. They probably would have, right?
The entire argument and what the report suggests is that actually they found Hillary to be predictable. It's not even so much. It's sort of like
what do they say that? Wait. What is the evidence that they found Hillary predictable and therefore could have preferred her? What are we citing for that?
I will find it for you. I will find it for you in a minute. First, I want to go back to this idea of the 4 pieces of evidence that were suggested in both the classified annex and then in the formal part of the ICA. The fourth part is, it was said in the annex, was the Steele dossier.
Wait.
You agree with that?
No. The Steele dossier was not used for the ICA assessments in January. That's not true.
That's not true. It was actually included in the annex.
It was included in the annex, but that was the only part that it was included in. Comey pushed for the include, but it wasn't referenced. It wasn't used. The CIA and nobody else used or built upon that for their findings for the ICA statements relating to whether or not Russia had a preference for a particular leader or whether or not any of the findings of that ICA would have changed. It was simply sectioned off. It was quarantined off in the annex because Comey fought hard because he wanted to include it, and nobody else in the ICA wanted it there.
If it wasn't used by anyone, why would Comey put it there?
Comey wanted it because Comey said that Obama had demanded that they turn over every single thing that they had in relationship to the Russia campaign interference stuff and everything else. And because they were also going to be briefing the incoming President Trump on these things, and they weren't sure if Trump knew anything about the Steele dossier. So Comey fought really hard to include it. Initially, he wanted to weave the text through the report of the ICA, but everybody else pushed back on him because the rest of the intelligence community didn't like it. They didn't think it was good material. So they basically quarantined it off with a huge warning, this is unverified, unvetted in the January ICA that was published.
Okay, so just to be clear, your one reason that Comey insisted on including this is he was just following orders that everything had to do with Russia involving the 2016 election should be included.
Those are Comey's statements himself, and they are reiterated in the Senate Judiciary report on this. So yes, do you believe something different?
Yes, I think if that would be the case, then there would be strong evidence if there was evidence exonerating, or I don't want to say exonerating, evidence that went the other way, that were potential other conclusions, such as evidence that they had of things that Hillary Clinton may have been doing, emails, or evidence they had of actual aggression that Russia used against Trump, then that would have been included in the ICA, correct? If they were mandated to include everything, right? They wouldn't have selectively let stuff out then.
So Dossier just keeps pushing Rob to make sense of his own argument, and Rob just somehow keeps fumbling. First, he tries to frame Obama as weak by pointing to the 2014 Crimea invasion and Syria's red line. Cool, except that doesn't explain why Russia would prefer Hillary, who Rob claims would continue the same Obama legacy. And Destiny catches that contradiction immediately and forces him to walk it back, asking what evidence do you have that Russia preferred her? And Rob's answer? I'll find it in a minute. Like, bro, come on. Then he throws out the Steele dossier like it's his ace card, only to get crushed again. Destiny explains it clearly, again, that the dossier was not used in the ICA's actual findings. It was thrown in the annex at Comey's insistence, not because it was relied upon, but because Obama asked for full transparency before briefing Trump. And yet Rob acts like just including it all taints the entire report. It's like saying a footnote discredits a whole book.
Wait, what do you think they selectively left out?
For example, they didn't include that there were releases about Colin Powell, email releases they got from Colin Powell saying that basically Colin Powell thought that Trump was a piece of shit. Then there were a bunch of emails that Russia had.
Wait, what is that?
were
What
things
do
that were-
statements from Colin Powell have to do with foreign election interference? That's what this ICA was tasked
It
with.
has to do. The ICA was tasked with determining what Russia did to meddle and what their motivations were. Correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
How to
So
deal with
then
interference conduct.
all evidence to come to not just one preferred conclusion, that is they did it to help Trump. They should include, Obama gave them a mandate to include everything that could possibly be what their motivation was and evidence that they interfered, correct?
No,
That's your argument.
not everything that could possibly be, but what the ultimate assessment was of the intelligence community for what they were ruling on. This is why that all the other IC people didn't want the Steele dossier included, because none of them used it. Even the FBI didn't in their overall assessment. But Comey thought it was important to include it in some section or in some way because he thought that it was a huge thing that was being spoken about behind the scenes, and he wasn't sure if Trump had been briefed on it at all. But this is why you acknowledge then that the dossier was not relied upon for any factual determining anything in the ICA. It was just sectioned off. It was just quarantined off in the annex. It wasn't sourced anywhere, cited anywhere. It wasn't used to build upon any of the findings in the ICA.
But the problem is that there were certain people that had access to that annex and could see that information to help include what their judgment would be. In fact, when Brennan
Wait, what do you mean certain people?
There were, I think, the people at the CIA. I think there were people at the FBI and a couple other agencies.
No, that's not true. No.
So no one. Okay, so then who had access to the annex?
The annex was
Comey?
the annex
He was
was
the only one who saw it.
No, the annex was part of the final ICA that was put together and presented to Obama, and then I think in the future to Trump if he got the same ICA presentation.
Yeah,
that
but the
ICA was put
argument
together to
that's
present as part of the presidential, the PBD or whatever, the presidential briefing, daily briefing.
You
PBD.
tell me.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we're on the same track here, right? My understanding is that all of the intel groups that worked on the ICA got to see the body of the ICA, correct? But only the select few got to see the sort of annex, which is where the Steele dossier was included.
I mean, the top line cabinet people would have had to have signed off on the dossier, yes. But I don't understand what. Yeah, they would have seen that included in the annex. Yeah. I don't.
Okay, so the point is,
But
right?
that doesn't mean that the ICA was built. Anything in the ICA wasn't built off of stuff from the dossier, or in the ICA.
Well, there was stuff. Look, I'm actually like the Steele dossier, believe it or not, would be the strongest evidence that Russia interfered to help Trump, right? So I don't think it's helping your case. To
Wait,
say, like,
wouldn't the
look,
strongest evidence be the fact that they hacked the DNC and they hacked the DCCC email servers and then did timely leaks of that?
That doesn't speak to their motivation as to whether or not they were trying to help Trump or not. It speaks to their motivation that they were getting access to everything they could to interfere in our system. But the motivation of specifically helping Trump was nothing that was ever determined prior to December 8th.
So
We'll get to this in a
what
second.
didn't Putin expressing a preference for Donald Trump as a leader, leaking explicitly things that are anti-Hillary Clinton, and the fact that all the Mueller indictments, investigations, and the Internet Research Agency, all of them were on attacks against Clinton. That's just all coincidence? They were just trying to
Okay, if that's all true, why was none of that included in the ICA? Why didn't they include anything about the Internet Research Agency or any of that nature?
I believe that they did.
They included 3 pieces.
Hold on. Not only I believe they did, because I think that Prigozhin, is mentioned in the ICA as being a potential funder for. I don't know if they say Internet Research Agency by name, but I think that they say that there were. I don't know if the investigation, because it was just the ICA for what they currently had. I think that deep into the investigation didn't happen until Mueller got his hands on things, but I think they named Prigozhin as being one of the oligarchical funders of some of the foreign propaganda that came out of that ICA, which ended up being the Internet Research Agency.
So wrapping this up, Rob just basically admits his entire argument hinges on cherry-picked paranoia and misinterpretation. He tries to claim the ICA wasn't complete, then just gets caught not even knowing what was or wasn't included. He insists things like the Steele dossier or Colin Powell's private emails were somehow central, even though Destiny walks him through, again, why none of that was relied on in the actual findings. And when Destiny brings up Putin's public preference for Trump, the DNC hacks, and the Internet Research Agency's Clinton-focused attacks, Rob still shrugs and goes, why wasn't that in the ICA? Only to be told it was. He just didn't read it. That's what happens when someone is more invested in pushing a bias than actually understanding the evidence. And speaking of bias,
are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.